If people weren't getting an ROI on their podcasts, then I wouldn't have a business. I wouldn't have any repeat clients. From what I've seen and the clients that I've worked with, it's a very effective method of not only just advertising your business, but also networking.
Welcome to Canada Now. I'm Ashley Smith, and every week we dig into the bold ideas, real stories, and fresh perspectives shaping Canada's future. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Canada Now, the show where we explore how Canadians are building, creating, and even telling their stories into the next chapter. I'm your host, Ashley Smith. Today is a little bit meta because we are doing a podcast about podcasts. I'm joined by Brayden Dyczkowski, the founder of Podfather Creative and the guy behind the scenes of the studio where I record Canada Now. And a side note, someone who's helped me with podcasts in the past, and he's been wonderful. He works with founders, brands, and creators every day, helping them turn ideas into actual finished shows from audio only to full video podcast productions. So today we're talking about the evolution of podcasting in 2026, how businesses are using podcasts to tell their stories, what's changed with audio versus video, what's actually working in the studio right now, and where this medium seems to be headed next. This is a behind-the-scenes conversation, a little industry therapy, and hopefully a really practical one if you're thinking about launching or leveling up a podcast of your own. I'm sure we'll also get into Brayden's experience growing from a solopreneur to a small business owner and what that means in today's landscape. Brayden, welcome to your studio and welcome to Canada Now.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I really love it. It is funny because you're usually behind the scenes. So you're here, you're hearing all of my conversations, which is like, it's almost an intimate thing because you hear me fumble, you hear my insecurities, you hear my questions, and you hear everything that I do pre-editing.
Yeah. The nitty gritty behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah. And so, as I alluded to in the little intro there, I did work with you to some extent while I was hosting a show called From the Blockchain several years back. And I was introduced to you actually through the real estate brokerage that I have been working with for many years, Oakwyn, because you were doing a ton of stuff with them and actually just did their 300th episode. So super consistent. And it was a big inspiration for me seeing them launch and some of the really important work I think they were looking to do for connecting and storytelling and connecting with the people that they wanted to be talking to. I don't know where you started. I don't know what came first, but I know that you've had a lot of clients kind of in that sector, but now you have folks from all walks and all different industries. So
that's right.
Why don't you do the talking rather than me and share with the audience a little bit more about you, Podfather Creative, and like your story, how you got into this full time?
Sure. I mean, I'll give you kind of an abridged version because it's a very roundabout way I got into this, which I'm seeing is kind of like a trend with a lot of business owners I know. They didn't set out to become like the CEO of like a talent management agency, but you get from one spot to another, sometimes on a very windy road. I started out, I used to play in bands. I was playing heavy metal music from when I was like, I don't know, punk and metal from when I was like 13 years old, got into playing in bands 15, 16, 17. I moved to Victoria for university when I was 18 and played in bands there. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to like be the person like on stage. I wanted to be the person in the recording studio, but in front of the glass. Like I wanted to always be that, like, I don't know, I just loved playing music on stage. And that was like my number one passion. And I always really liked recording, but it was like partly one of my favorite parts of the whole process, aside from just straight up being on stage. Being in the studio was always so much fun for me. I was always the guy that was there for every single, every band member would go through their recording and they would come, we were recorded in Richmond and every band member would come over on the ferry, but I would be there for every single person's recording because I was like executive producer sort of thing. But I always viewed being a recording engineer as like, oh yeah, I'll do that if I like fail at music. I always viewed it as like, if I have to do that, it means I failed at my main goal, right? But as I got older and older towards my retirement from bands at 27, as I got closer to that, I kind of started to switch gears and enjoy the recording side of things even more. and which coincided with I got arthritis in my knees, so I couldn't work, these random construction jobs anymore. So I said, well, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to quit the band. I'm going to go to school for recording engineering. And I got some advice from my mom, who was basically telling me like, that's awesome. You should definitely do that. Follow your dreams, but maybe you should have a bit of a backup. Like, you should go get your real estate license at the same time. She was doing some small development stuff in Vancouver at the time. And so I said, okay, fine. And so I got both of those things. I got my license. I finished recording school. Both those things happened in 2013, like the same month. And so I did both of those things from just at the same time. I kind of had a foot in both kind of circles for, I think, the next 6 years, until I got to the point where I had my best year ever in real estate and realized that I was absolutely miserable. And I found that I was kind of getting really excited to go to every single recording session and really anxious to go to every showing for real estate. And so this was one of the first times where I kind of just said, you know what, this is like not the financially sound step to make, but I'm going to quit real estate and go full on into music production. And I knew I would take a big hit. But right at the end of that, when I was just considering doing that, I met a couple realtors who had a podcast and they were struggling with it. And that's the Scalina brothers with the Vancouver Real Estate Podcast. There are a couple realtors trying to edit a podcast, and they'd be spending 8 hours, 10 hours a day or per episode editing their podcast. And they were looking for some help with that. I said, hey, I could definitely help you out with this. I have real estate experience, but I'm also like a very skilled audio engineer. So I came in and started working with them. That led to their brokerage, Oakwin, as you mentioned. They wanted to start a podcast. So I said, okay, yeah, I can help you out with that. And then another couple realtors, or another realtor at the brokerage, wanted to start their podcast. And so before long, I had 3 podcast clients, and, a random smattering of audio music production clients. And I started realizing like, hey, this is like, it's not that it's easy work. It's difficult. Like, it's very high pressure. You only get one chance to record the conversation. The dialogue is quite difficult to edit, but like, it's kind of like, I get the work. I was always a vocal producer, and I really like working with the clients. I switched from working with like broke musicians who were nitpicking literally every single second of every song you work on, because it's their baby, to working with like businesses and CEOs and and marketing people. And all of a sudden, it's not that they don't care about the output product. It's that they're not precious about they have limited time, and so they're not precious about every single thing. They have a marketing budget usually, so there's not a struggle to get paid once you've finished the work, and it's a constant turnover of work. So you one episode, you put it out that week, move on to the next one. Whereas with musicians, like I had one song I spent 9 months working on, and then it took me another 3 months to get paid for that song. And so I started to realize, this is like, I like this work. I should just fully pivot into this. And I made the decision to fully drop music production and pivot right into podcast production and start this company that I have now. That decision took effect January 2020, when music went straight to the gutter and podcasting went to the sky. Like, it was just like, I couldn't have, there's always this idea of like right place, right time, but that truly was like, that was the right place, the right time. And that was another one of those, like, this is a scary decision, but I just, in the back of my mind, I know I should do it. And I just it's sometimes when you're building a business, you just have to throw caution to the wind in a calculated way. And that's what I did. And yeah, then podcasting took off. Every client leads to another client, because you end up meeting new people. Everybody's in the business space. You end up meeting people, like all these guests on the different podcasts you record, and somebody's always, almost every single session, I have somebody say like, oh, I was thinking about starting a podcast, and okay, take my card. And then all of a sudden, I did nothing for marketing the business, and now I have a steady range of clients, and I have 2 editors that work for me full time. And it's just, it's been a whirlwind, but that was, it's been 6 years since going full time into
Yeah.
podcasting.
And a beautiful new studio. So for those of you watching YouTube, beautiful new studio. And for those of you not watching YouTube, check out the YouTube.
Yeah.
But it's lovely and it's really nice. I feel from my perspective, this being a slightly newer show, being able to bring guests in to what I see as a professional studio space allows them to, it signals to them, like, I'm taking this very seriously. This is not a hobby, even though right now it might look like that because I'm not generating revenue from it. But it is like I'm being very intentional about it.
Yeah.
And I think being able to come into a space like this and have somebody that's taking care of the audio side, it signals this is a serious thing. I think it makes the guest feel, I don't want to say makes them feel important, but it's a different feel than just, sitting on a couch in a living room or on a Zoom call, which we still do here, by the way. Every once in a while I do remote and I'm still in studio. I really want to elevate what this show appears to be until it becomes the thing I want it to be. Basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. Perception is reality, right? Number one rule of business.
But I do think before we dive into what trends you've seen in podcasting, I do think it's worth kind of noting that you saw this gap in an emerging marketplace.
Yeah.
And even though, and you can correct me, but this is my perception, even though podcasting is becoming far more mainstream, we'll touch on that in a bit. Sometimes the joke is like everybody has a podcast now.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of tools, and I'm using some of them, frankly, that to help creators DIY.
Yeah.
I see that you have like increasing demand, despite the fact that, anyone can do it, quote unquote.
Yes.
So can you tell me just a little bit about that part of it? Like how you've seen the evolution of why people are doing it and how they're doing it and why they're wanting to come, to work with you?
Well, so speaking to that idea of like, oh, it's everybody has a podcast, is it a fad or is it too late to get into it? Like, people were saying that about podcasting when I started this company, which was 6 years ago. And at that point, people were basically podcasting at any point is about 10 years behind YouTube, right? Are people still having businesses and making money on YouTube? Are there still new YouTube channels coming up and becoming popular? Absolutely. I think it's a little bit short-sighted to say that it's like had its time. I think it's still very much on the uprise, right? Even, YouTube, maybe it's plateaued a little bit, but like podcasting is definitely seems to be climbing in I guess, popularity and listenership and adoption. You're seeing people from, it used to be, almost the entirety, I think it was 80% of podcast listeners were in the kind of 19 to 35 range. And now that's expanding. A lot of the I guess, like even up to like the 50 to 70 crowd is getting into podcasting, and almost everybody knows what one is, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those things where it may seem like it's had its day, but it really hasn't.
Let's get into the granular then a little bit, because I think even as you started, as we started this conversation, you talking about your origin story, a lot of your clients were in the real estate sector. I know that's changed. You have a much broader range of clientele now. I think that speaks to why a podcast can be effective. Like you can have folks from the same geographical area in the same industry, potentially trying to reach the same clients, prospective clients, or build an audience in the same kind of general demographics, but there's still value in them doing their own and telling their own story or building their own narrative. What kind of feedback do you get from the folks, especially the ones who've been maybe doing it for some time now? Like, what kind of, I don't want to say results are they seeing, but what's the value? What's in it for them? Why are they doing it?
Okay, well, let's compare it to like, how did businesses advertise like 10 years ago? It was mostly like ads, like Facebook ads, Google ads, and stuff like that, where if you were to compare the numbers of like impressions, I guess you'd call it, so people have seen the ad, to the number of listens that most of my clients are getting on their podcast, like the podcasting numbers look awful, right? Like it's like such a small amount compared to these impressions that people were getting on these ads. However, you can completely flip that around when you're talking about effectiveness, right? How long do you have when you pay for a Facebook ad or a Google ad? How long do you have to capture someone's attention as they're scrolling by? It's like a quarter of a second or something like that. If they stop on it, that's great. They may or may not click on it, but that's like the funnel down and down and down. If for X amount of impressions, you get X amount of clicks. For X amount of clicks, you get X amount of follows through to the website, and then it goes to conversions, right? Whereas a podcast, like if somebody listens to you, you just have so much time to, I guess, to not even sell them on what you're selling. It's selling them. Podcasting is selling people on your personality, right? And so going back to that idea of like, how can you expect to have a successful podcast when somebody else in the exact same industry in the exact same geographical region has a podcast and it's successful? But it really comes down to like, people are going to listen to their podcast, they're going to listen to your podcast, and some people they're going to really get to know you and your personality, assuming most people are, I think, fairly genuine on their podcasts. And they get to know you, they fall in love with you as opposed to that person's personality. Whereas some people are going to obviously resonate towards that person's personality. But if the listener kind of falls in love with you, that just goes back to like the old school, like business principles of like know, like, and trust. Now you've basically ticked off all three of those boxes. And if it's entertaining and you're actually giving value to them, they're going to be incredibly more likely to purchase something you're recommending or hire you as the role that you are in your industry, as opposed to somebody who just like flicked past an ad and just saw it for a quarter of a second. So it really comes down to the time and like the ability you have to really sell somebody on you as a person. Yeah, it's very personal.
I don't know how much insight you have into, say, your clients' listener statistics, for example, but I'm sure anecdotally as you're chatting with people, and especially for those who've decided to like be consistent over a period of time, there's value for them. Have you heard any stories from folks about the benefit and like what they're getting out of it?
So my two biggest clients, as far as like both episode volume and probably revenue as well, those two clients are it's a big part of why they're doing it is building a library content. One example would be somebody saying, I want to have this as a company. It's a piece of company culture. So the people in the company can essentially listen to it and get a vibe check on the company. And they can also say to their friends and their clients, they can say, hey, my company has a podcast, and they feel good about that, right? It's almost like saying, my company is relevant these days, as opposed to, it's an industry that there's a lot of kind of stagnation in.
And engaged.
Right? Yeah, and engaged. Exactly. They know what's going on. They know what's happening in their industry because it's frequently talked about on the podcast. And it actually, it's the owners of the company that are doing the podcast, and the amount of time. The third benefit is the amount of time they save, rather than having just countless meetings with all of their employees. If somebody comes to them with a very specific question about something, they can point at, go listen to episode 176. If there's any further questions you have, like, I'm happy to answer them, but this is basically going to answer all your questions.
Are most of your clients in business? Like, would you consider a lot of what you see, because you get to hear all of the conversations. You don't just hear my conversation pre-editing. You get to hear everyone's conversation. So you have a pretty good idea of like what's going out into the world.
Yes.
Is this mostly B2B type of stuff? Mostly people trying to acquire customers? Like, I'm just trying to provide a snapshot of like the types of people and types of content you're seeing, and if there's a range.
I would say there's both. There's B2B and B2C. But I like to look at it a little bit differently as far as like effectiveness of like somebody wondering, like, should I start a podcast? Most CEOs, businesses I work with, they don't want to be, they're not like looking to start a podcast as a hobbyist. They're not looking to spend hours and countless hours every week editing, right? So there's got to be, it's usually they're going to hire us or somebody else to do the editing. There's got to be an ROI there. There's got to be some sort of return on that investment. And so what I find is the most effective style of business to use a podcast for is kind of like high value. Anybody who's selling high value, low volume products or services. So meaning every single sale is a high value, as opposed to a business such as maybe like Lululemon or somebody like that, who, like, if they have a podcast, but their podcast is their business is very high volume. They do a lot of sales, and each sale brings in a little bit of money. But like a business like that, they're more looking to like just grow the awareness of the brand. Whereas like somebody like a realtor, somebody like an estate management firm, something like that, like they're going to, one sale could pay for their entire year of podcast.
Like acquiring a new client really is. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so like it makes sense in that case. Let's say you only get 125 listens per episode, but like if one of those listeners converts over the period of a year, that's their entire year paid for. And the vast majority of these, I'd say all of my clients, they're converting more than just one listen a year, right?
Yeah.
One listener per year. And so that's where it really does make sense. Not that it doesn't make sense. There's lots of other people that have kind of high volume, low value kind of businesses where they're selling a lot of products, but you just have to think of other ways to like make that ROI worth it, whether that's sponsorships on the podcast to pay for your production values, or maybe that brand recognition is actually worth it to grow the brand, right? So you always have to look at your goals, like what do I want out of this podcast, and is that feasible from a podcast, and how do I get to that through the podcast? If people weren't getting an ROI on their podcasts, then I wouldn't have a business. I wouldn't have any repeat clients. And so, I mean, that just speaks for itself, right? It seems to be, from what I've seen in the clients that I've worked with, it's a very effective method of not only just advertising your business, but also networking. Like the amount of networking that, you get access. It's very easy to call somebody up and say, hey, would you like to come on my podcast? I'd say maybe even easier than calling up somebody you don't know and saying, let's go for lunch, right? Yeah. Sometimes they might say, yes, let's do it. But like, there's that kind of almost like in the business world, there's almost that ego aspect of it where somebody's like, ooh, I would like to talk about myself for a little bit.
Absolutely. Let's dive into this for one sec. So if you're listening and you want me on your podcast, let me know, because I am that person. I want to be on other people's podcasts. I love the idea of sitting down, and I would be very flattered.
And you're great at it.
Thank you. Yeah. It's flattering. And the other thing is you get to then, especially if you're doing interview style, if you're hosting an interview style podcast, you get the network effect benefit, because the folks on the show will share the show, and then you get your content, your thought leadership, your point of view shared amongst, the folks that they're sharing it with.
Yeah.
And once you throw social media into that equation, it can be huge. I mean, it really depends maybe on the quality of the content, but there's a huge advantage there that is hard to measure.
Yeah. High tide floats all boats.
For me, there's a lot of, one of the underlying threads is kind of like, it gives folks an opportunity to platform thought leadership, which I think is very hard to do in other ways. And what I love from the Canadian perspective, the reason we wanted to have this conversation is I think your story of how you found a gap in a market and filled it very effectively, especially in an area that's kind of innovative, is really interesting. So I'm hoping listeners take that piece away, but also everybody's story is a bit different, and the Canadian narrative is different. Yeah. And so, for me I am an avid listener. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and the types change over time, depending on my mood, depending on what's going on in my life. Like when I knew that I wasn't going to be very active in my business around having a child, I switched to different things. There was a lot in the news, and then the news got maybe a little bit too depressing. So it's time to
pretty heavy.
Switch it back up. But there's so much out there. But I do think I recognize as a listener nuance. I recognize as a listener, even from a business development perspective, like if I'm listening to I don't listen so much to coaches, but that type of a genre, like business coach or like personal development, professional development.
Yeah,
There's, when I'm listening to podcasts that are created by American creators, I'm listening to them, so they're obviously good, but there's still nuance in the Canadian landscape, the Canadian business landscape, how to be effective. And that's where I think there is a gap still to some extent. And that's what I'm hoping folks who are tuning into this might think, you know what, I have been thinking the podcast arena is flooded. Well, stop and think in your business, what you do. Are there many folks in the Canadian landscape?
Yeah.
Because your tone, your language, the way you look at things is going to be different. Your regulatory landscape, the policies, like there's nuance no matter what. So I think there's opportunities for business owners and leaders that they might not be fully reflecting on.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to sort of highlight that. I don't have like a bunch of Canadian stats, but for people listening, the app that I use, by the way, for when I'm doing remote recording is called Riverside. I'll maybe put these links in the show notes. But they've released some reports, for the last year and looking ahead and the trends, et cetera. Podcast listening is growing rapidly. It says more than 584 million people listened to podcasts in 2025.
Yeah.
And the numbers are expected to reach 619 million this year. Engagement is at an all-time high with 34% of Americans, sorry to use an American stat, listening to an average of over 8.5 podcast episodes per week, and 83% spending more than 9 hours listening every week.
Yeah.
So that's a lot. Those are highly engaged listeners.
Yeah, that is a lot. I mean, I'm always a little bit skeptical of like about anybody that I'm sure like Riverside's numbers are probably accurate.
Sure.
But like for example, when you get like Spotify is coming out and say just as they're launching a video on their platform, they're saying podcast listenership is moving towards video, and they're putting out all these like stats about that. But you can go look on. There's a company called Signal Hill Insights, and this is like the main, I guess, a podcast analytics company in Canada. They do a big, huge study every year with a massive sample size. And they're backing up, they'll back up these numbers saying that there is a huge push towards video podcasting, right? And I'm on a lot of, subreddits and Facebook groups to do with podcasts, the podcasters and behind the scenes editors and stuff like that. And everybody's kind of up in arms about it because it just means for the podcaster themselves, if you do your own podcast, it means, oh, do I need to pivot to video? Do I need to now spend 5 times the amount of my equipment, build a full set? And then the podcast editors are griping about it like, oh, I don't think video is going to be a thing because they're just mad that they're going to have to be doing more work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can't, even though I don't listen to podcasts in that way, my listener habits have me listening to podcasts, probably like yourself, when you're doing something else, when you're driving, when you're doing the dishes, when you're cooking food, when you're doing laundry, like whatever you're doing that you would normally be bored at, that's when I'm listening to a podcast. And so I personally have no interest in into watching a podcast, right? However, the stats are saying that like, especially the younger generations, the Gen Zs and stuff, they are moving towards video podcasting, whether or not they're actually watching the video or they just, there's other stats that say that a lot of the people that are using video podcasts are actually just putting it on in the background and like still doing whatever they're doing and not paying much attention. Mm-hmm. But the stats do say that it's moving towards video podcasting.
Yes, I will say I found a Canadian stat. Okay. So, and it's on NASDAQ.com. So, but anyways, the podcast listening in Canada reaches 39% of Canadian adults monthly as YouTube surpasses Spotify and platform share.
Yeah.
So a ton of people are tuning into video. I will also, again, so this is a little more casual of an episode, and it's anecdotal a little bit, but I'm the same. I listen to podcasts mainly on audio.
Yes.
But there are certain things that capture my attention while I'm scrolling YouTube. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It may not have been my go-to platform, but I wouldn't have found it otherwise. Yeah. And I will put it on, and I'm usually doing the dishes or making dinner, so I'm not watching. And there's other things to say about this, but this is also the reason why I've learned to get over myself a little bit, is as someone who's like, thinking about creating a podcast and thinking about the video part. We can debate that piece a little more. It's like, you as the presenter don't have to be perfect and look great. And I think a lot of people worry about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I could do a few things. I could, put on some, like, deal with these bags under my eyes and whatever.
You look great.
But the thing is, I know most people aren't actually watching.
Yeah.
But they're still consuming, and YouTube is owned by Google. And I think about that a lot. And I also think now I'm starting to create short content, short form clips. And YouTube Shorts is an awesome way to put out the content in little digestible pieces. And then it directly, if someone's interested, brings you to your channel. And you don't have to send them somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so there's all these different parts.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's another element of it where if somebody's going to come to me and ask me, should I do just a video podcast or a video and audio podcast? I'm hard pressed to tell them, like, hey, you don't need video, because even though that's not my listener habits, I know that stat that you just mentioned where YouTube is taken over from Spotify as the number one place where people listen to podcasts. That's not by accident, right? Like YouTube, maybe it has something to do with the push towards podcasting video these days, but like YouTube is Google, right? It is the most powerful search engine in the world. And so if people are looking for a podcast, that's the first thing that's going to come up, right? Like, I don't know if you've Googled a certain podcast, but it doesn't matter what you Google. If it's on YouTube, that's going to show up first.
Yeah.
Those algorithms are so powerful, and you can put an audio podcast on YouTube now. You can add your RSS feed to YouTube, and it'll just upload the audio as you upload to every other platform, and it'll just have the thumbnail as the video. But those don't do as well in search results as having a real video. YouTube knows when it's a real video, and they push it in front of people, right? Mm-hmm. And so that just discoverability on YouTube is so powerful that I can't advise someone against doing a YouTube or doing a video podcast unless it comes down to the budget issue, right? Mm-hmm. Because it does get it's significantly more work, and significantly, if you're hiring someone else, more expensive to do, right? So if it's a budgetary thing, I don't think it's kicking the pants to like not do video, but it certainly will help to do video. At the very least, you should be capturing everything on video, and just like you said, putting out reels, putting out shorts, YouTube shorts, because that's how you're going to capitalize growth from the podcast platforms to whatever brand you're doing, and then back and forth, right? It's going to help grow your podcast as well if you have a presence on Instagram, presence on YouTube Shorts.
Yeah.
Right? And
I don't want to belabor, we can move on from video, but it's worth noting that like Netflix is now signed on to do podcasts through streaming. They've done some deal with like iHeartRadio. And so it'll be interesting to watch, what happens, what the trends are, and then what works and what doesn't. Because just because they're doing it doesn't mean it's going to work. So we'll see.
Yeah.
And those are mostly going to be like, I'm assuming, high production, kind of like celebrity, but it still more speaks to the overall trend of audiences consuming podcasts. Yeah. So let's bring it back to earth a little bit. And so if you're speaking to a business leader or entrepreneur or anyone who's thinking about putting something out, and maybe whether it's financial constraints or not, maybe it's a commitment thing. Like how do we trial if this is for us? Like maybe audio's the first step, doing a season and audio, seeing where it takes you. So like what kind of conversations do you have with folks who are just dabbling with the idea of starting in terms of just the basics? How often should they think about releasing it? What's a good idea for the type of content? Should it be interviews? And how long should it be? Like, is there a rule of thumb, or does it really depend?
It does depend on, the first thing you should ever do if you're thinking about starting a podcast, and this is a conversation I have with every single client that I have, is you need to figure out why you're doing a podcast. Why do you even want to do it? Is it just because you like hearing yourself talk and you want the world to hear you talk? Then it gets a lot easier, but because you can just do that. But if you actually you should theoretically, if you want to have an ROI, you want to have your podcast be successful, you should have a goal, right? So you need to figure out what's my goal. And from that goal, you're going to pull your target audience. And then once you have a target audience, then you have a direction, right? You know where what you got to think, what would this target audience like to see in the branding? So that's going to kind of dictate where the style of everything down to the style of artwork you use, your fonts, everything in your branding, the language you use when you're writing your podcast description and your show notes and stuff like that. Your podcast name should appeal to that target audience. Like all that stuff's very important, right? And then getting down to it, going into the podcast, the actual content, if you're thinking about that target audience when you come up with every single topic, when you invite every single guest onto your podcast, will this specific target audience want to hear from this topic or hear from this guest? Then that's how you're going to maximize your success, right? Just keep it interesting for that niche and go niche. It's really difficult to the old saying, like, if you appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. That's how it is. Yeah. Find a niche, because the niched podcasts generally do better. There's always exceptions, right? You've got like your Daily, right? The Daily is one of the biggest podcasts in the world. Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO. Like, I feel like those kinds of podcasts, like, that's kind of everybody's the audience, right? But when you're going down like out of the top 5 podcasts, like everything's niched. It's a business, how to become successful in your business, or like this specific like 8-part series on this murder that happened in Northwest Territories, or like it's very niche, and the people that are into that niche are going to be really into that. So,
and consistency, I guess, is a real.
That's another aspect of it, is like if people are thinking about how much of a commitment do I need to make, I would say it's, as any content production, any sort of content strategist will tell you, like the more content you can put out there, the faster you're going to grow. But with podcasting, it's also very important, your consistency in posting, right? So if you're posting, once a month, that's totally fine, but keep doing that. Keep that once a month up, and that's going to help. It helps your listeners to know when to expect a new episode, so they can plan for that and put it into their schedule and expect to listen to that. Does that make sense? Like,
totally does. I haven't been really abiding by this, but it's my goal.
Yeah. Yes. Totally. It's like if somebody knows, like every 2 weeks, I'm on Tuesday at 6 a.m. I'm going to get a new episode of Canada Now. Like they're going to plan for that, and they're going to expect to turn that on their drive to work on the every second Tuesday, right? So you don't need to do every 2 weeks, but like, let's say you're only doing once a month. Like I'd say like you still want to try and come up in people's feeds, right? So that's where the full content strategy comes into effect, where you want to like try and capture some bits of the conversations and post those in between your episodes, so you still stay relevant in people's minds. And platforms like Riverside are incredible for helping to do that. It's a little bit more money, but if you pay for like the kind of the step up outside of the free plan on Riverside, you start to get options where it'll take your episode after you've recorded it, and 30 minutes later, you've got like your title, your show notes, some chapters, some key takeaways, but more importantly, you've got like 10 reels already made for you that AI has decided are key moments from this conversation. And a lot of times when I'm looking through these reels, I'm like, those are really good parts of the conversation. So you've got half your work done for you already. You can basically make your reels right in Riverside. It's already done it for you. You just need to like stylize it, add your logo, do whatever you need to do to like finalize it. But the work's already done for you. So taking that content and just like staying top of mind in between your episodes gets more and more important the further out your episodes are spaced.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're touching on a really important point, though. Like, obviously, the tools are out there to make some of these practices more accessible, for folks. I'd love to know, again, not as like a commercial for Brayden and Podfather Creative, but like, what's the suite of services that you provide? Because I get the impression that as you've you started as an engineer, like a sound engineer,
Yeah.
and now you're having to plug in different aspects, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And like clearly I'm not hiring you for all of them yet until I get someone to help pay for it. But yeah, give me an idea, because I think for folks who are thinking about this, or even if you're in upper management and trying to pitch like a marketing strategy to your boss, like knowing what's out there, who you can hire for what, I think is helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So I think this, like the suite of services that I offer is very similar to, I mean, I didn't, to be honest, I didn't really go do a ton of market research. I just had clients and decided to build my business knowing what those specific clients were looking for, right? I was always looking, when I started the business, the need that I saw was busy business owners looking to expand their marketing capabilities through the medium of podcasting. People that didn't have time, or maybe they don't have time, maybe they just don't want to buy the equipment, learn how to use it, learn how to do all the editing, right? So uh, basically, we offer a podcast launch. There's a lot of like heavy lifting to be involved in getting a podcast off the ground. You've got your intro, outro creation. You've got to record both those things, put them together. You've got to find some music and get the licensing for that music. You've got to build a trailer. You've got to set up your hosting account, set up your streaming accounts to be tied to that hosting account. You've got to, it's just, there's a number of things that have to happen. And so we have a podcast launch package. And then once you get to that point where your trailer is released, then it gets into what I call like the maintenance mode. And from there, it's basically, it's almost like not like an a la carte, but like we have a package where you can be just recording with us. And then there's a package where you can, and that's if you're doing your own editing and all your own stuff. Then we have a package where you can be recording, and we're recording audio and video, but we're just delivering raw video and we're editing your audio. And then the full package would be recording and audio and video editing. And then we also have some clients who record at home and only hire us for the editing.
Mhm.
So yeah, when I first got into this, I started to see how much time it took to do the recording side of things, because it's not like I can't scale myself. You only have so much time in the day, right? And so I got some advice from a friend of mine who said you should just like really focus your business on editing clients.
Mhm.
So I tried to do that, but I made the mistake of, like, I just built a really nice studio, and so I found all the clients that I was getting were coming to me because they had seen the studio and wanted to record in the studio. And so at some point I just had to say, like, I'm just going to give up on like pushing the editing side of things, and I'm going to really lean into the recording side of things. Built a bigger studio, and then it's you, like any business, as you get more and more in demand, you eventually need to realize that you have to raise your rates, right?
Mhm.
And so that's what I did, to the point where now it's okay. I'm comfortable taking on new clients as full recording production clients. And now, like, looking back on that, like it actually was a really good idea, because as AI gets better and better at doing like the editing side of things, you have to look at like what's one aspect of my job that AI can't really take away. And it's having a studio.
Mhm.
Like an AI, no matter how much AI wants to, it doesn't have this studio space. It can't operate, move the camera tripods around and stuff like that, and figure out the lighting situation. So it's actually a fortunate thing that I did lead into that, because this is I think it's a fairly safe part of the aspect of what I do that can't really be taken over by AI. Whereas, there's always the fears about the editing side of thing that could, I don't think it's there yet, but down the road, as it gets better and better and better, maybe people don't need us for editing, right? But the recording side of things is something I'm very fortunate that I did lean into.
Depending on the person listening, I'm thinking about the business leader who's got, children who will soon be young adults. What I'm hearing from you is this, like, these new pathways to careers that the last generation would not necessarily be thinking about, because the ecosystems didn't exist. Like the thing, like podcasts as an example, didn't exist, and it's really this emerging opportunity for entrepreneurialism. and even for those who maybe wouldn't have otherwise been thought of themselves as entrepreneurs, like you're not, maybe there will be podcast studios that pop up where they hire, X amount of staff for this or that, similar to, let's say, radio stations would have done sort of similar types of things in the past. It reminds me of how we all have to open our minds a bit to where like careers are going, what opportunities are going, where, different areas to fill in or intern can come to play.
Yeah.
Right. Like if someone's listening that wants to get into this, sounds like you probably could use an intern.
Well, yeah. That's the problem though with like when you have such highly skilled work, like if you get an intern, it ends up being more work than
like mentorship.
Yeah, exactly. Like mentorship is one thing, but when you're trying to like, if you're like, I want you to actually do this work for me, like, man, it took me years to figure out how to like the intricacies of operate after being a professional audio engineer for and recording. I had been recording myself the audio aspect anyways for like 15 years before I touched a camera.
Yeah.
And then it was like learning a new language when I touched a camera. And it took so long to figure out all the little intricacies. And there's so many things you have to think about. And so
maybe the semi-retired audio engineer that wants a gig.
Yeah.
Every now and then.
That's a possibility.
Right?
Yeah.
I guess my point is really not to try to solve your problem, because I'm not going to be able to do that. But it's more just looking at the way that the economy is moving, the way jobs are moving, the way like people are building their businesses, changing so much. You're like, everyone's figuring it out along the way, which is really interesting. I have a lot of admiration for what you've done here, because it's really grown from something little to something very big.
Thank you. Yeah. It's, I feel like it's, anybody, just going back to what you said about like looking to start a business, I've got small kids and stuff like that. For a long time, it was that same thing that everybody goes through. Like I remember working every single day. I was trying to take weekends off, but like every single day I'd be working at least 12 hours a day. Like I literally had 2 laptops where I was editing on one, and then I would hit the like export button, and maybe it takes like 10 minutes to export a podcast, and I roll around to my other computer and I'd be working on that one and going back and forth. And I was just so run off my feet. And that's a tough thing to do when you have young children, right?
Yeah.
So getting over that hump is a really hard thing to do, and you do have to think about that if you're wanting to start a business. But then, then once you get over that hump, like it is a great job to have if you have children, right? Like trying to find that time to do the special things with them can sometimes be a little bit easier, but then you do have the trade-offs, right? Like I'm in Vancouver right now. My family's in Pemberton, and so I have a week and a half that I get to spend with them, and then it's like 5 days that I'm here, and I miss my kids, but I also enjoy my job, if that makes sense. So it's a trade-off, right?
Yeah. Everyone has to figure what works for them, and but it also speaks to how there's no one way to do it. So yeah, you said it, structuring your life in a way that really works. I do have to ask, like, you get to be the fly on the wall for so many different types of conversations. Are you like listening to all of them intently? Like, what I'm really trying to uncover is, have you learned anything surprising from sitting in on all these different types of conversations people are having?
Yeah. I mean, you pick up little snippets on everything, right? Like I do a Wills and Estates podcast, and I've learned so much about the things that you should and shouldn't do not even as you're getting towards the end of your life, even as like my age. I'm just like, oh my God, I gotta sort out my will and like, stuff like that. So yeah, you pick up little things. Every now and then I'll record a podcast where it's, I feel like even when you're in the recording seat, you still have your preferences, right? Genres and stuff like that. So some podcasts I'm just like, this is so far out of my interest level, and it's hard to like focus on it at that point. But like I learned so much from recording, just sitting there recording podcasts, right? And then also from the in-between moments where because sometimes it might not be relevant for the podcast, but sometimes the guest and the host are talking about something after the recording and it's like, oh, wow, I never thought about that. So yeah, you learn a ton being a podcast producer
Yeah.
and editor as well.
Yeah. Oh, can we talk about that for 1 second? Podcast editing? Like,
Yep.
you do really get into the sort of, I just did it. I just did it. I just said this sort of, just the mannerisms people have.
Exactly. Yeah. The ums and the ahs and the false starts.
And the you knows.
The you knows. Yeah. And that's a great question. There's some people that start every single answer with, that's a great question. It's like a nervous tick almost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a funny thing. You have to, because when we do our editing, that's part of the job is like cutting out, we try to cut out as much of that stuff as we can while still keeping the conversation sounding natural. So I have had clients before that are like, listen, I want every single and ah cut out of the episode. I don't care if I can hear the edit. I hate them. And I'd say that's less common than people that are like, yeah, do what you can to clean up the flow, but like, I just want to sound natural. And I think that makes more sense because when you're doing that, when you're doing all these cuts, it's almost like my whole goal is to make whoever's speaking sound more confident. And it's almost like auto-tune when you're on a singer, where it gets to the point where they're fixing their tuning, you're fixing their pitch, and then all of a sudden you can hear it, and then you've ruined all their confidence because people can hear that you're doing the tuning. It's almost the same thing with podcasting where you're fixing these errors, you're fixing them, and then you start getting too heavy with it. And all of a sudden people can hear the edits and they start to think like, oh, I wonder, subconsciously they're like, oh, this whole conversation is just like cut and edited. And like, I wonder what the real conversation was like. And now you've killed the perceived confidence, right? So yeah, we try to keep it pretty natural while still enhancing the flow as much as possible.
Yeah. The reason I wanted to highlight that is because I've been doing some editing and it's just nice to say it out loud because it's a thing. It's a real part of all of this. But the other piece is for folks who are maybe less confident about their own abilities to be able to give this a try is that there are ways, and most of us use them, to sound more polished than we really are. And so, nobody's perfect. And you do get better, I think, with practice. You learn, what areas, you're stronger at and where you need to develop and what some of your bad habits might be. Yeah. But starting and doing is essential. And then some of the stuff can just be fixed and it's behind the scenes. And that's where you can come in.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think for folks who see the value and they're just nervous, it's worth highlighting that part.
For sure. And there's tools that like, for example, one that I can definitely give a shout out to is Descript. Like Descript is an incredible tool that will allow you to, you can take a whole episode and you can say find filler words, and you click on this thing and it finds all the filler words and it'll say we've found 259 filler words for you, and you can say delete all and it'll just take every single and ah, and it's a bit annoying because you have to, there's certain filler words, it'll take out the most obvious ones, and there's certain ones that you have to pay for the upgraded version for it to do. It can sometimes cut off, like it doesn't do perfect edits always. Yeah. Sometimes it'll cut off the filler word and then the person has a breath after and it'll cut off half the breath as well. So there are flaws to it, and there's reasons why as like professional audio engineers, I don't use it. I prefer editing with waveforms like in proper editing software because I've learned it that way. But if you're just getting into this and you're looking to like find a quick way to like edit your podcast without having to learn a full piece of recording software, Descript is amazing because you're editing with text. Yeah. And Premiere lets you do this now as well. Edit with text, and Riverside does. So there's lots of tools that you can use that don't require you to learn how to learn what a waveform is and learn how to crossfade properly and do all these like advanced editing techniques. Yeah. You can jump in and like kind of get your podcast reasonably well polished and just get it out there, because that's the big thing, is like getting it out there and not getting into analysis paralysis mode.
Yeah, I love that. I really appreciate you being a guest in your studio.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you. I'm hoping to be able to work with you more, not less, and in more capacity as this develops over time.
Shout out to all the sponsors out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But why don't we let the audience know like where to find you? And actually, let's also let them in on a little secret that I only recently found out about is that you also have your own podcast.
Oh, yes, I do. It's one of those funny things where I'm like very like religious almost about like release timelines for my clients. But that's a personal project. And so I constantly fall behind on that. But yes, I have a true crime podcast called Murderous. And yeah, I think we've got like 6 or 7 episodes out now, but I've got a few in the bag. Got to get going on that.
Where can people find you, and what should, if they're interested in working with you, what's the best way to connect?
And yes, you can find Podfather Creative. I'd say the best way to connect would be either giving me a call or sending me an email. I sound like a fuddy-duddy when I say that, but I just don't use social media that much. You can find me on Instagram at Podfather Creative.
You still haven't actually accepted my like connection request on
Really?
LinkedIn. I noticed.
Oh, on LinkedIn. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Probably 6 months since I've looked at my LinkedIn.
I know. So that's why, yeah. Why don't we say we're going to put your website in the show notes?
Yep.
And your contact information will be in there.
Sure.
And then folks can find you. They can follow you, of course. But
Just
if they're
send me an email or give me a call and Grandpa will get back to you.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I hope folks listening have enjoyed this, and it gave a little bit of insight into like what we're doing here, what we see the value is in podcasting. I mean, clearly, if you're listening to this or watching this, you're into podcasts in some way.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hoping to do is just put it out into the Canadian landscape for those that haven't really looked into it, that if you've been thinking about it, think about it a little more and look into it, because it's doable. People are doing it now, and there's room for, I think, many different stories. Brayden, thank you so much for coming on Canada Now. I really appreciated this. I'm looking forward to a full year ahead of episodes in the studio.
Yeah.
And I thank you to everybody for tuning in, listening. If you're listening on audio, please make sure you subscribe, leave a review, share. And if you're interested, check, because I am doing the YouTube. Check things out on video on YouTube, subscribe there. And until next week, have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you again.